Wow, it is really good. The display is bigger and better than any other modded Game Boy I've built. The sound coming out from the console is better than any other modded Game Boy I've built. The whole form factor is exactly the same as a Game Boy Color. Genuinely, it is so much better than I was expecting. Now, I have built a lot of Game Boys on this channel, but this one really is something new. Quite literally, this is FunnyPlaying's FPGBC console, and every component in this machine is brand new, apart from the cartridge that I'm playing on it. Unlike other consoles I've built over the years, no matter what buttons, screens, shells I've added, they've always had that original Game Boy motherboard inside with the CPU as the beating heart of that machine, but not with this one. The kit that I've used here has an entirely new motherboard with chips that mimic the original CPUs using a technology known as FPGA. So although I've been able to play Game Boy games on new hardware such as the excellent Mio Mini Plus in the past, this is through software emulation. But FPGA is hardware emulation. So this technology helps us create a console that can play original Game Boy games on a completely new piece of hardware, which is great. A lot of the time, like with these Game Boy Advance SPs, I'm currently in the middle of troubleshooting. If I'm going to create a new build, I'll have to spend quite a bit of time giving a bit of TLC to the motherboard that's in that console. It might be a faulty switch, crackly sound, battery contacts might be corroded, capacitors might need replacing, and so on and so forth. So you can end up spending quite a bit of time just getting the machine up to standard before starting doing your new build. Also, your original consoles aren't really designed with modern upgrades such as IPS screens in mind. And as a result, you might need other upgrades such as a new voltage regulator to keep things running smoothly, but not with this kit. Every component on this motherboard and in this shell is brand new. It has worked with every single game I've thrown at it. I've played original Game Boy games, Game Boy Color games, repro games, ROM hacks. I've used EverDrive. I've played LSDJ on it. I've tried Nanoloop on it. Everything has worked. There is absolutely no input lag on the controls, and it sounds fantastic. And what's more, no classic consoles or childhood treasures need to be harmed in the making of a brand new console. Not to mention the fact it's even cheaper than upgrading an existing console. It's pretty straightforward to build. There's no cutting involved, no soldering, and of course no harvesting of components from existing consoles. It's a really good gateway into this modding hobby for newcomers. It's great for those purists who'd rather preserve their existing hardware. And let's face it, it's pretty good for us existing modders as well if you're a little tired of having to repair or restore some parts before creating something new. So I bought my kit from Z Labs in the UK. I'll leave discounted affiliate links in the description for the parts that I've used in the video. You can order them direct from FunnyPlaying as well, and it'll likely end up a little bit cheaper from there. However, you've got the long wait to get it delivered from China, and also you've got the risk of import duty fees when it arrives. So for me, getting it straight from Z Labs was a much better option. And even then, for what you get at the price, it's astonishing value, especially with the rising prices of the used market of Nintendo Game Boys. So let's take a look at the kit itself. You get the motherboard, which is all black with a headphone socket, USB charging port already installed. It's got the volume dial replaced with a rocker switch that goes up and down for volume, but it can be pushed in to activate the FPGA setting menu. There's sockets on the board for the battery connector and the speaker, which means there's absolutely no soldering required for putting this thing together. My kit had the version 1.11 motherboard, which is the latest version at the time of recording. You also get the screen assembly with a ribbon cable pre-attached and a glass lens already bonded to the display. Now there's only one lens option available at the moment, which is a black border with no text on it. However, this works really well because the screen can display in different sizes, and no matter what you're displaying, you've got a neat black bezel around the edge with no obvious borders on the screen. There's a new speaker which is chunkier and a lot louder than the original Game Boy Color speaker. This has a cable attached to plug into the motherboard, and the same applies to the 3.7 volt 1800 mAh battery that provides hours of play on a single charge. So in addition to the main kit, you'll need to buy a housing shell, which is a specific model to this kit. It's got space for the battery and the screen and room for the USB charging port. You'll also need to buy a set of replacement buttons. Make sure you get one that includes a power switch. You'll need that, and it doesn't come with the shell. And a set of silicone membranes, including the start and select buttons. All of these are available in a range of colors. So I've seen a lot of comments saying FunnyPlaying could have just pre-assembled these and sold build them as a working console, which is true. And the general consensus I've seen is that it cuts manufacturing costs, which can be then passed on to the consumer, which is also true. But after being a fan of this modding hobby for so many years, I think it's more than that. The ability to be able to choose what color you've got for all these different parts means that you get your own unique, bespoke aesthetic to your new console that's in your own style. I can see myself building more of these in the future, and it's a really nice thought to think no two are going to look the same. That's always been one of the main draws for modding Game Boys for me. Having something familiar and classic, but also new and different. So for me, being able to choose your own parts brings an element of creativity and freedom to the whole process. And of course, having said all that, I abandoned colour altogether and went for a completely clear build. It comes with stickers, but I didn't actually put those on the back. I love being able to see the label on the cartridge through the shell. I bought a set of clear buttons, which came with a clear infrared window at the top here, as well as the D-pad, A and B buttons, and the power switch cover. And of course, I got the clear FunnyPlaying's shell, which is specific to this motherboard, as mentioned earlier. I got clear silicone membranes to go under the buttons, although they're more of a kind of a frosted, translucent white than an absolutely clear, but they really do look nice inside the shell. Now, doing this build gave me a chance to try out something else new that I've been working on recently. One of the issues I have with building any Game Boy is that the buttons tend to stick out from the front, which is useful when you're using it, but when you're building it, you tend to have the console sitting face down. Now, this means if you wanted to get the buttons sitting neatly, you need to lift the shell slightly, which can make things a little bit fiddly to assemble. Also, lying the console face down means the front of the shell and the screen are possibly prone to damage from whatever debris you've got sitting on your work surface. So I've designed this laser cut tray. It's got layers that allow the console shell to sit centrally with an area below it that allows the buttons to sit neatly in place without being pushed out and with very little surface contact on the shell and no risk to the screen. There's a soft felt layer on the upper surfaces to keep the shell in place and avoid scratches. I've also added a Game Boy Color icon on there as I'm planning on a similar build for the DMG, Game Boy Pocket and Game Boy Advance. There's a row of holes along the bottom for the main screws to go in. So in this case, 6 longer tri-wing screws for the main shell and 3 shorter crosshead screws for the motherboard. I've set the depth of the holes so that the longer screws stick out slightly. It makes them much easier to identify when you're picking them out from the tray. It also allowed me to pick up, move and tilt the assembly as I went along with no problems and not having to remove it from the tray while I did that. One slight issue was that I think the top opening could have been a little bit more snug to secure the shell in place better, but only about 1 millimeter or so all round. So this is another item that I'm hoping to get onto my Etsy store once I get that set up. Hopefully there's people out there that might find something like this as useful as I do. Let me know what you think and any suggestions for improvements in the comments. Anyway, back to the console itself. You need to get a specific shell for this kit. As I mentioned, it's very similar to the original Game Boy Color shell, even down to the fact it's got the Nintendo logo on the front and the Game Boy logo on the battery cover. It's a bit cheeky on FunnyPlaying's part, isn't it? But it makes for a much more authentic feeling console, so I'm all for it. So yes, you do have to use their particular shell so that you've got the right screen opening and you've got the USB-C socket. However, the quality is really good and you can get them in a range of colors, so it doesn't feel like a compromise at all, and it certainly makes the build easier than having to cut an existing shell. So with the front half of the shell on my tray and the rear shell to one side, I put the D-pad, A and B buttons and the infrared window in place. The shell kit does come with a black one, but I think the clear one looks best with this shell, so I went with that one. There's actually no infrared LEDs on this console, so it doesn't have this capability yet. If you were planning on using that, sorry, you'll have to stick to your original Game Boy Color. However, there is a space on the motherboard for these LEDs, so it might be on a later revision or it might be something that you can add yourself at a later date as support and development for this console continues. I put the silicone membranes over the D-pad and buttons and the start select buttons in place. The speaker goes in next. It's got a little rubber gasket to keep it in place, and I've found this to be very important. The speaker is very loud and powerful, which results in a lot of vibration, so you'll need to make sure you've got everything fitted in place nice and snug. So there's a wire that comes out from each side of the speaker, and when the motherboard is lowered in place, it can get in the way, so you have to position the speaker at a sort of 45-degree angle to give you clearance for the motherboard. So make sure you get it in place correctly and do a quick check with the motherboard in place before you move forward. Then you can lay the motherboard in place and plug the speaker wire into its socket. There's a blank plug in the motherboard which needs removing first. With the motherboard in place and the speaker attached, it's time to put the 3 screws in place to secure it. Now I watched Macho Nacho Productions video about this same console. Great channel, by the way. Definitely check out their video after you've finished watching this one. Now in that video, Tito said it's best to just use the screws on either side and avoid the middle one because it could cause damage to the shell. However, I used all 3 on mine. Now I understand the logic of only putting the 2 in, but in my opinion, I think having that additional screw in the middle, in the area where a lot of pressure is applied to the buttons, it prevents the motherboard from flexing too much and gives a much more solid response from the buttons when the console's in use. So for me, I'm quite happy with the 3 screws. You've got your choice. So the screw heads are actually pretty big compared to recent stuff I've been working on, like PlayStation controllers and DS Lites. So I ended up swapping over to a slightly larger screwdriver to give me a bit more control getting the screws in. Now this is a brand new shell with brand new screw posts, which means you're going to be cutting a new thread in as that screw goes in for the first time. Best way to do this is for every time you put the screw in, just wiggle it back out a little bit and then in a bit more and then out, and you keep alternating between those clockwise and anti-clockwise rotations, and it'll cut a really neat thread without putting too much strain on the plastic. Now if you end up, like me, having to take this console apart a few times throughout the build, then you'll be grateful of having done that in the first place. Now bearing in mind the vibrations from the aforementioned powerful speaker, make sure the screws go all the way in with the motherboard sitting nice and flat against the shell. But of course be careful not to over tighten and cause any damage to the plastic. So a quick inspection of the front and the buttons and the shell were looking really good. I think maybe black silicone pads might have been a good option against that particular motherboard, but I like the clear start and select, so I'm quite happy with my choices in this case. Next I put the power switch in place, put the rear shell on, being careful not to pinch that speaker wire, and then I used a tri-wing screwdriver to put the 6 longer screws in position, again taking the time to cut a neat new thread for each one. With the screws in place, the screen was the next step. Accessible on the front of the motherboard through the opening in the shell is a latched connector with the latch flipped up. On the back of the screen is a ribbon. These ribbons are delicate. Be careful with it. If it rips, it's a heartbreaking experience. Slide the ribbon into the socket and flip the latch down either with fingernails or with a plastic spudger. On the back of the screen are 2 self-adhesive strips to hold it in place, but I wanted to test if the screen worked first before permanently attaching anything. So the screen tilts and then slots in at the bottom edge first and then lays flat, but I was having some issues with the ribbon catching on the pins of the cartridge connector. I don't know what I was doing wrong there because I've not seen that on anybody else's video, but if it happens to you, you just need to slide something down the back like a spudger just to move the ribbon out of the way and it'll locate absolutely fine. It's time to insert the battery, and in my opinion, this is likely to be the root of any problems you might face in this build. The connector is small and quite fiddly, and it's a push fit, and you need to push it harder than you might expect. Certainly harder than feels comfortable in terms of not wanting to break anything, but just trust me, it needs a good firm push for it to lock in place. The battery sits neatly in the shell with the spring in the compartment holding it nicely in place and stopping it from moving around. Put the battery cover on to keep it in place. So now you can switch it on and hopefully it will work. Full disclosure, mine didn't on the first attempt. I took it apart. I thought it might be something to do with the switch not quite locating, because it was a repro switch cover, and I thought that might not be lining up with the switch bit. But when I opened up, that all seemed fine. And then when I put it back together, I felt that extra little bit of movement on the battery connector when I pushed it in, and it all worked fine. So as I say, if you're having any problems, before you go opening it all up, just make sure that that battery connector is seated correctly and pushed all the way in. So the last step was to get the screen permanently attached. Lift it out, peel off the backing from the self-adhesive strips, and then put it in place. Slide in the lower edge in, again being careful to make sure that the ribbon's got some clearance from those cartridge slot pins. It is a really neat fit, so there's no chance of it ending up sitting a bit wonky. And with the screen laminated to the cover, alignment of the actual display will be perfect. In hindsight, I might have been a bit safer doing this and then attaching the battery, but it looks like I got away with it. And that's it, your console is all built. Right, so let's take a quick look at what the actual console does. My updated firmware had the patched boot logo, so instead of the FPGBC logo, I've now got the Nintendo Game Boy logo. This is currently in Game Boy Color mode. If I press the button on the volume dial there, it will bring up the on-screen display. You navigate that by going down and up on the D-pad and A and B to change whatever you're on. So we're currently on the GBC core. If I change that to the GB core, go down to save and then reset, it will reboot in the original Game Boy mode. And of course, with no cartridge in, it loads with a blank strip. Now, strangely, it seems that with no cartridge in and it's in GB mode, you can't load that menu. So I'll put Tetris DX in because this is one that will work in both modes. Switch on and you'll see we get the official Nintendo logo. So it makes it a bit more, well, a lot more authentic when it comes to loading up your console. We'll just turn down the volume with the dial. So instead of it being a scrolly wheel, you just nudge down a few steps. You can also adjust the volume within this menu here. So volume is currently on minimum, so we can increase and decrease that. We can change the brightness of the backlight, which on the mid to low settings has a really good contrast, like the, what's the word I'm looking for, the color saturation looks really good. But on full brightness, it is very, very bright. Display mode will swap between different sizes. So you can basically have what's called integer scaled, which is more pixel accurate. So you can have it on ×4. So you'll get much more kind of pixel perfect graphics in terms of that. You can go on to the ×4p, which is with the pixel grid, which again makes it look that bit more authentic. But I've got to be honest, the full screen, it doesn't look blurry or messy. The pixels still look pretty crisp. But having it stretched across that screen, this is massive. This is a bigger display than I've got on any other modded Game Boy that I've done. So I've got it on that full mode all the time. As I say, we can swap between the GB and the GBC core. So now we've got that and we can see it's in the kind of standard monochrome color. Before I swap back to GBC, we can change the GB palette. So you can swap between different colors of the screen. So you can choose whatever color you want. Now with a clear one, pretty much everything goes with this. But if you had a particular color scheme, then you can choose the palette to go with what you want. GB color fix. Sometimes when you're on a Game Boy Color, the colors get a little bit messed up or inverted. So there is a setting to fix that, which is good, but it does feel like a little bit of a workaround at the moment. So we can put that to on. And as I say, I'm going to change to the GBC core. I will save that. You'll see we've got the battery level down here at the moment. Battery is currently on full. When you charge it, you simply just put a USB-C cable in the bottom, and there is a charging LED down here. Can you charge it while it's on? It appears you can. Blue light down here while it's charging, and when it's fully charged, that turns green. So I've got all of my settings as I want them. One bit that I didn't mention was the speed. Now you can change the clock speed. Annoyingly, for some, it doesn't perfectly match the original Game Boy. So you can't get the clock speed to be exactly the same. The games don't run at exactly the same speed. But if you go all the way up to the top on the settings, to the fastest setting, and then go down by 2, that gets you pretty much to the standard. Sometimes, you know, like if you want to cheat in Tetris, you can slow down the clock speed. Sometimes if you're fed up with some long dialogue screen and drawn out spontaneous battles, you can go on the quicker speed. So it's quite nice to be able to do that again without having to install any mods. But if you want the standard speed, then as I say, max it out and drop down 2. So we'll save that and we'll reset. And now it should reload in the Game Boy Color mode. Ooh. Right, okay, so look at this. You see how that's gone all a little bit messed up? If that happens and you load and it doesn't look quite right, you bring up your on-screen display again, go on Game Boy Color Fix and just swap and choose one of them, because this is a very interesting looking background at the moment, isn't it? But you swap that to off and you see it fixes it. So in some cases you won't need it. In fact, in most cases you won't need it. But if you are having issues, try doing that and it will fix it up. In some cases it might mess it up. So in this case, I think I might leave it off. So I will save that and we can come back out of that menu or we can reset. But in this case, it's displaying fine. So I was going to be talking about the sound. So if I max out the volume on this, it is pretty loud, isn't it? I mean, I'll put that over near my microphone. Very, very loud. And it's the bass that I'm noticing. Like, before, if you were listening on headphones, you'd hear all those bass lines, but you don't on the speaker usually. But this is for me, like obviously I do a lot of music and things on my Game Boy. Having a speaker that sounds good, that has a bit of bass to it, really does make a significant difference. Tetris DX looks and plays brilliantly. There's no input lag on these controls. Go Marathon. There we go. Okay, so I've got Zelda DX on the official cartridge there, but here I've got a repro cartridge, so we'll see how that fares. Seems absolutely fine. So you'll see here that the chain is flickering. Now that's based on how the games were coded for the older hardware, which couldn't display a transparency, so they used a trick to get it to flicker, but the processing speed was slow enough that it just made it look transparent. But this is much more capable, so it looks like it is flickering. So there is a fix in there. If you press to bring up your FPGA menu and you go down to frame mix and switch frame mix on and then switch that back off again, it's transparent with no flickering. And when you're moving around and you're playing this game, it looks and plays absolutely fine. I've got like a bootleg multi-game cart. It says it's 32 in one, but you're gonna like this. So we've got Tiny Toon, Chase HQ, Mario and Yoshi, DuckTales, NBA All-Star Challenge. But in here, we've also got Best Tiny Toon, Nice Duck, Play Duck, Power Duck. So, Nice Dr. Mario. So let's load up Nice Dr. Mario. Oh, it's just Dr. Mario after all. So we're going to one-player game, and we'll just press start on that. And that appears to be working absolutely fine. Kirby's Dream Land looks really, really messed up there. For reference, this is with that speaker on full volume. Turn the speaker right up. It's like night and day, isn't it? So if you've got a game like this and the Game Boy Color display is acting up a bit, then what we do in that case is we go down here, we go down to the core and change that to the GB, save that we've done that, and then reset. And now we're back in the original Game Boy mode. I can change my palette to whatever color I want. So let's change that to, there we go, that sort of grayish blue. And now we can play and everything should look absolutely fine. So, and the original Game Boy games really, really do look awesome on this thing. So I've got Metroid Return of Samus DX. So this is a ROM hack of the original Metroid 2 for the Game Boy, and this should play in color. So if we switch on, we are going to need to go into our GBC core. So it is, I mean, I would hope that on future firmware updates, it might automatically detect if you've got a Game Boy or Game Boy Color game and swap to the right core automatically. That would be a really nice feature. But it feels like a chore at first, but once you get used to doing this, it doesn't really feel like an issue. So I've just gone on GBC there. We'll save that and we'll reset. And now it will load with the Game Boy Color logo. And here we are. So start with that. And if the colors look a little bit odd or unusual, we can always try the GB color fix and see how that looks. So we'll go, that's currently on, but remember that messed up all the colors on Tetris DX when it was on. So if we turn that off and then come back out, you will see that this looks much more as it should now. Samus's suit in red and yellow, the background with the greenery and the flowers. There is some slight flickering on the screen as I move along and jump, and as I come towards these blocks, as they appear into view, there's a slight yellow flash on some of them. Run along, and as I'm approaching those, we've still got that slight yellow flashing here and there. So that's more to do with the game than it is to do with the console. So again, no issues with the console itself. So this is the USB 64M cartridge, which is popular for use with LSDJ, and this works absolutely fine, and you can play your tunes on there. And the display is brilliant for it. Hearing your music, perfect, it's excellent for this software. I've also got a more expensive drag and derp cartridge, which is a FRAM save based cartridge, Tried that one out and that worked absolutely fine as well. So yeah, for playing with my music software, I'm really happy with that. And in terms of those flashcards, no issues at all. Original Tetris. Too many squares. So let's try that on the GBC palette. So we'll save that and reset. And you've got that color palette. Incidentally, if we try it on the color fix on, it doesn't make any difference on this one at all. We've got Drone Boy again on a custom cartridge. So that's working absolutely fine and looks great on the display too. So we'll try a legit Game Boy Color game in the non-black cartridge version. So this will only work in Game Boy Color mode. I suck at Mario. So I do actually have 2 copies of Tetris DX, which means that we can do a bit of a comparison. So Tetris DX in both consoles. Okay, so this boots up slightly slower than the Game Boy Color. The original Game Boy does load a little quicker. So if I switch on that one and then that one, try and get them to the same time. There we go. So I got the timing right. They both booted at the same time. You see the difference in the screen, but it's more like the timing that I'm looking at here. So you can see after a little while, they've dropped a little bit more out of sync. They started at exactly the same time. But now this one will start on the demo mode sooner. And the music's gone out of sync as well. But it's only very slight, and I think to most people, and particularly if you haven't got another console next to it, you're not really going to notice much difference. Try out Pokemon Blue in Game Boy Color mode. So you can see the colours look great on that as well. Let's have a little look what it looks like with the Game Boy Color fix on, see if that makes a difference. No, that makes no difference at all, so that's all fine. So you can see that the sprites have got like half of it in colour and half of it in black. So if that is proven to have an issue, the theory is we put Game Boy Color Fix on and then we save that and we come back out and this now look absolutely fine. And if we go in here, everything will look okay. So it's quite a nice feature. If you load something up and it doesn't look quite right, you just bring up that menu, go to GB Color Fix and it will hopefully fix it. So yeah, that's pretty good. Right, so this is the original EverDrive in here, and here we go. The display looks a little odd. Let's just try it with that GB Color Fix adapted to off, and there we go. We can see everything absolutely fine. So we'll go into the GB menu. We'll choose a random letter. Let's go with T, and we'll go with Tiny Toon Adventures. Load and start. Change our core. We'll need to reset. So we'll save that and reset. And you'll notice that when it did the reset, it reloaded the game itself. It didn't reset the whole EverDrive, which is really handy if you've got some Game Boy Color and some regular Game Boy games. At first I was like, oh, I wanted to go back to my menu. But if I want to go back to my menu, I'll just switch it off and on again. Now there is a bit of flickering as I'm going from left to right. So let's see if the frame mix being off makes a difference there. Let's save, come out of there. Okay, so now I've turned frame mix off. There is not that flickering issue. So sometimes you'll want it on, particularly for things like the Zelda game I had before. But if you are experiencing some flickering, as you usually, it's going to be as you scroll along. then you can just open up the menu and change that. And you don't have to like reset the whole thing every time. So if I want to come right back out of my game, I have to switch off and back on again to access the EverDrive menu. Always start with Donatello. At this size, the screen really does look great. And you can hear that bass in this tune that you just didn't hear before. So on top of everything else, this console has a firmware that can be updated and is seemingly in constant development. If support continues, this thing will be able to do even more over the coming months. But I've got to warn you, there are risks when it comes to updating your firmware. There is a slight possibility that you can encounter problems, and there is nothing more heartbreaking than being super excited about a new console and then bricking it, like I did. So credit to FunnyPlaying. They have made the update process really straightforward. So far, there's been a few different versions. This one came with version 1.04, I think. I've upgraded it to 1.06. It does all work now, by the way. So you download an update file, which is called update.bin. You then switch on your console, connect it to your computer, and it sees it as an external drive. On the computer, you drag and drop your file into that drive. The console will detect that the update file is there and start updating straight away. Now, this should just take a matter of seconds. The console will reboot and you've got your new firmware up and running. But for me, this didn't happen. I had a blank screen and I waited and waited and waited and nothing was happening. I watched a few other guides and it really should have been happening much more quickly. I tried different USB-C cables, I tried 2 different computers, I tried a few different update files to no avail. I was starting to get a little bit crushed, a little bit panicky. Have I completely destroyed my brand new console? Now, literature for this generally says you can't completely brick it, you can always restore it, but I was having no luck and it was taking me quite a while. So if this does happen to you and you can tell it's got power, you can hear a little bit of noise through the speaker, but you don't hear the boot up sound. If you look at the top of the shell, particularly if you've got a clear shell like this, you could see that the screen is on, it's just a blank display, but obviously the update hadn't worked. So here is what I did. On the GitHub repo, which is managed by Mako, I went into the folder for the hardware version 1.1 and I clicked on the latest release folder, which is the version 1.6. Now on here, there is the update bin file. There's also one for a patched boot logo, which I tried. Again, this one's just labeled as update bin. What I'd done before was right clicked on that file and downloaded it. It came through as a fairly small file. However, if you click on the link instead of downloading it, it opens up another page where you can download the raw version of the file, which still comes through as update.bin, but is a slightly larger file size. I tried dragging and dropping that onto my console and thankfully it worked. It was such a relief. I thought I'd completely ruined the easiest console build of 2024, but no, it's all fine now. And it's working really well. And it's now also benefiting from a few additional features that were added for this latest firmware build. So yes, there's a fantastic feature where you can upgrade your console. That is great. And if you are prepared to deal with things if they go wrong, then go for it. If you're quite happy with it as it is, I'd say maybe just leave it as is for now. So there we have it. A brand new piece of Game Boy hardware in 2024. Now, we can't talk about a new FPGA console without mentioning a certain other handheld. For me, the Analog Pocket is a completely different proposal to this. This doesn't strike me as a competitor to the Analog Pocket. It is a lot cheaper, so of course the quality isn't going to be up there with the Analog Pocket. But I love the DIY nature of this, buying it as a kit, choosing the colors, building your own. I like the fact that the whole form factor is exactly the same as a Game Boy Color. And I love the fact that FunnyPlaying have clearly made loads of these. It's widely available, it's easy to get hold of, and there's none of that limited release nonsense that I just can't be doing with. Now, in terms of use, yes, of course, it is not perfect, but actually, genuinely, it is so much better than I was expecting. After I initially built it and I was testing it, I was like, oh, this is quite good. But I've spent a few hours playing so many of my favorite classic games on this. And the more time I spend with it, the more I am blown away with just how well this thing works. I switched on another Game Boy doing a bit of a comparison, and I couldn't believe how quiet the speaker was. If you're into making music, it's great. I mean, obviously it's not as good as headphones, but in terms of previewing your music, there's bass that you never heard out of your console coming out with the music on this thing. I think the form factor is perfect. It feels great. It feels familiar. I am going to have to break in these silicone pads a little bit. There is quite a bit more resistance on these buttons than there is from my original Game Boy. But breaking in these pads is going to involve sitting and playing loads of classic games that I love. So that's not really a hard problem for me to have to deal with. I wasn't sure if going for all clear was going to be the best choice with so many awesome colors available. But every time I see it just sitting on the side, I can't resist just picking it up for a quick go on Tetris DX, which has been permanently living in there just recently. I've been doing this hobby for a long time. When I first started modding Game Boys, you could buy old broken consoles that were in need of restoration for fairly cheap off eBay, but now prices of those in the used market have gone up and up and up, making this hobby less and less accessible to newcomers. Yes, it's not perfect, but wow, it is really good. The display is bigger and better than any other modded Game Boy I've built. The sound coming out from the console is better than any other modded Game Boy I've built. And the compatibility with all sorts of different cartridges, games and software has really impressed me. But I think the really exciting thing about this is that it feels like the start of something new. It feels like the start of a new phase in terms of modding Game Boys. I think it makes it more accessible to newcomers. It makes it more exciting for people who've been building these things for years, and now we've finally got something new to get stuck into. I'm curious to see where it goes from here. Firmware updates. What extra features is this going to have? What additional things is it going to be able to do over time? How is the support going to come along? Are they going to forget about it and bring out a new version, or is this going to keep getting better and better? With the inevitable success of this console, are FunnyPlaying going to bring out more? Are we going to see a reproduction DMG console, a Game Boy Pocket, a Game Boy Advance, maybe even DS? The possibilities are limitless, and with developments in technology, the FPGA chips will become better and more proficient at mimicking the original hardware too. These are exciting times. So all the parts in this build I bought, as I mentioned before, from Z Labs in the UK. I've got affiliate links in the description for all the parts that you might need. They are discounted, so you'll save a little bit of money, but by using my link, you'll be supporting my channel as well. I did a Game Boy Color mega build recently, and if you want to see a little bit more about what's involved with that and how it might compare to something like this, then you might want to check out this video that's popping up here. I think you are gonna love it.